The meditating monk jolted awake, yet terrified to find surging seawater submerging the roof of the world, Himalayas. Unaware this marked the world's doomsday's arrival, he calmly struck the temple bell as tsunami walls loomed closer instead of fleeing. This chilling scene connects to the infamous Maya prophecy. Cut to a family dinner shattered by violent tremors. They dove under the table just as ex-husband Jack burst through the door yelling, "Get to the car, now!" The streets disintegrated faster than Jack's SUV could outrun. Through collapsing skyscrapers, he drifted like a rally pro, threading a death-defying path through raining debris. After white-knuckling to the airport, disaster struck again. Pilot dead. Ex-wife Lisa remembered her new beau Gordon had flight training, making him their last hope.
You're the guy! No, I am not the guy! Trust me, you're the guy! I'm not being modest!
With death staring them in the face, Gordon white-knuckled the controls. The crippled plane barely cleared collapsing terminals, wobbling through smoke-choked skies like drunken dragonfly. Below them, California drowned. Survivors? You're looking at them. Finally catching his breath, Jack revealed the truth.
It's not just California. It's the whole goddamn world is going to shit.
Turns out 3 years ago, a scientist named Tom traveled to India to visit his friend Sanan. Sanan was a firm believer in the Mayan prophecies, but not blindly. He had scientific evidence to back it up. He took Tom to an underground mine just 1,000 meters below the surface. Yet the temperature there soared to a scorching 120 degrees Celsius. Sanan explained that due to solar activity, a massive buildup of neutrinos was happening. This would trigger intense tectonic movements. On December 21st, 2012, the Earth's crust would go into full-scale upheaval. When that happens, the entire world will be turned upside down, and tiny, insignificant humans, they won't stand a chance. Tom immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. He rushed back to the White House with the data. When the president found out, he wasted no time in calling a secret meeting with world leaders. Together, they devised a survival plan for humanity, codenamed Project Noah's Ark. The location? Tibet, China. Why? Because Tibet is home to the highest mountains in the world, but not just anyone could board the Ark. You either had to be an elite expert in your field or filthy rich enough to drop a cool 1 billion euros for a ticket. At that time, Tibet had just suffered an earthquake, but as soon as China got the assignment, they immediately got to work. Meanwhile, world leaders scrambled to collect cultural artifacts. They refused to let human history be wiped out. Time flew by, and soon, it was 2012. News broke that a group of hardcore Mayan prophecy believers had committed mass suicide. The world was shaken. Some people spiraled into panic. Others doubted the prophecy's legitimacy. Then an earthquake struck California. Massive cracks split open the streets, but no one paid much attention. They just chalked it up to regular seismic activity. That same day, Jack was planning a camping trip with his kids. But when they arrived at Yellowstone National Park, the place looked nothing like he remembered. The lake's water had completely evaporated, and the ground was so hot it could burn your feet. Just then, a convoy of military trucks rolled in. Jack quickly realized they were from the government. It was Tom, leading a team of scientists on an investigation. The military ordered Jack to leave immediately. They feared a volcanic eruption was imminent. Tom's findings were shocking. The ground temperature had reached a blistering 2,400 degrees Celsius. It looked like the Mayan prophecy was coming true, step by step. But Jack? He was still completely clueless about what was happening. As he was leaving, a crazed man blocked his path. Curious, Jack asked him what the military had said.
Well, they don't like us going over their fences, and that the whole area back there is unstable.
Unstable? They said unstable?
This was Charlie, a diehard believer in the Mayan prophecy. He was convinced Yellowstone would be the first place to blow, and he was determined to broadcast the destruction to the entire world. If he couldn't stop the planet's demise, then he'd be the first to witness it. That night, as Jack and his family set up camp, they overheard Charlie's live stream. He was preaching the Mayan prophecy like a madman, and everything he said sounded eerily convincing. Jack decided to have a private talk with him. Charlie didn't beat around the bush. He laid out the truth about the apocalypse, and even spilled details about Project Noah's Ark. Jack wasn't sure whether to believe him. Then Charlie dropped a bombshell. Everyone who leaked the truth about the end of the world was already dead, and the ones who silenced them? Governments around the world. And one of those victims, a professor who just so happened to be Jack's old friend.
Every one of these guys, dead!
Oh, that's Professor Myers.
He ran the Atlantis shuttle program. Why, did you know him?
Myers is dead.
Oh, yeah, 2 months ago. Had it all figured out. Everything the government was doing, where and why. Even sent me a map.
A map for what, Charlie? What's the map for?
They're building spaceships, man.
Jack felt like Charlie might actually be telling the truth, but just as quickly his rational side kicked back in. Come on, the guy looked like a total lunatic. Charlie kept rambling on about why the world was changing, but Jack had already lost patience and walked away.
Hey, guess what? They're selling seats.
Put me down for 3.
No, guys like you and me don't have a chance. You'd have to be Bill Gates or Rupert Murdoch or some Russian billionaire.
Meanwhile, the city streets started shaking violently. Cracks even began splitting open in the ground. Luckily, nothing serious happened. By the time Jack got his kids home, his boss suddenly called. He told Jack to immediately take his 2 sons to the airport. Jack didn't ask questions, he just did as he was told. But just before boarding, his boss's son blurted out a shocking secret.
Now you're laughing, Curtis, but we have tickets to go on a big ship. We will live and you will die.
Jack stared at the cracks in the ground. Could Project Noah's Ark actually be real? Everything was pointing to one terrifying truth. The world really was ending. Then a thought hit him. That crazy guy, Charlie. Right now, he was the only person who knew where the Ark was. Jack took a flight back to Yellowstone. The moment he landed, he spotted Charlie's RV parked nearby. He sprinted over, but Charlie was nowhere to be found. Turns out he was up on the mountain, live streaming. Jack didn't waste a second. He jumped in the RV and floored it up the hill.
Charlie!
Jax?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I thought you were toast.
No. Where are the spaceships?
There's no way you can make it there.
We have a plane. You can come with us, but we gotta leave right now.
Suddenly, a massive flock of birds took off in a panic. Charlie's eyes lit up. It's happening. The volcanic eruption he'd been waiting for was finally here. Jack rushed over and demanded to know where the Ark was. Charlie finally admitted the map was in his RV on the bookshelf. Then just as he finished speaking, boom! The ground beneath them swelled at an alarming speed. The volcano was about to blow. Jack begged Charlie to leave with him, but Charlie was dead set on staying. "This is history in the making," he said. Jack had no time to argue. He jumped in the RV and sped off. Seconds later, the volcano exploded. Watching from a distance, Jack's ex-wife saw the massive eruption. She thought for sure Jack and their daughter were gone. But then, out of nowhere, the RV came tearing through the smoke and fire. Jack handed his daughter over to his ex-wife. Then he ran back to the RV to grab the map. Meanwhile, Gordon had already fired up the plane. He knew if they didn't take off right now, it'd be too late. But Jack was still inside. Then, a fireball crashed down. The ground split open, and the RV plunged into the abyss. Everyone thought Jack was done for. Gordon started to lift off, but then, Jack clawed his way out of the crevice. He ran with everything he had, sprinting toward the plane. At the very last second, his ex-wife grabbed his hand and yanked him on board. Fireballs rained down around them, narrowly missing every time. And finally, they escaped Yellowstone. Jack finally unfolded the map, but no one could have guessed. Noah's Ark was in Tibet, China. There was no way their beat-up plane could make it that far. They needed something bigger. Meanwhile, the entire world was falling apart. And yet, the president sat alone in a church. He refused to abandon his people and escape on his own. Tom understood how he felt, so he didn't try to convince him otherwise.
President's not coming.
So, the captain doesn't want to abandon his sinking ship. That's his choice, and a noble one.
Then the president made a public announcement. The end of humanity was near. Panic erupted everywhere. But even in his final speech, he never mentioned the Ark project. To the poor, that truth would have been too cruel. At the airport, chaos was everywhere. Jack and his group finally arrived. Since the co-pilot was missing, his boss was still there waiting. They pushed through the crowd, and suddenly, a massive aircraft came into view. If they wanted to get out of here, Gordon had no choice but to step up again. He was going to be the co-pilot. Just before the airport was overrun, they took off. Below them, the world was flooded. Even Washington, D.C. had become a city underwater. And the president? He stayed behind, going down with his people. But hey, this is a movie. Jack had planned to refuel in Hawaii, but when they got there, the entire island was on fire. They had no choice but to keep going. But with the fuel they had left, reaching China was impossible. The pilot prepared for an emergency landing in the ocean, but then something unbelievable happened. Before they even made it halfway across the ocean, they had already reached China.
There is no more ocean, and we're pretty close to where we wanted to go.
It's like the whole world shifted by 1,000 miles.
It's called Earth crust displacement theory.
Turns out, the Earth's tectonic plates had shifted so violently that the distance between the US and China had shrunk. But now they had a new problem. How the hell were they supposed to land in the middle of the snowy mountains? Jack's boss made a crazy decision. They were gonna drive off the plane in a car. The pilot ordered Gordon to go with them. He'd stay behind to make sure the plane went down safely. The car hit the snow hard but came to a stop. just barely. The pilot wasn't so lucky. The plane plunged off a cliff and exploded. The explosion attracted a fleet of armed helicopters. Jack and the others frantically waved for help. For a second, they thought they were finally safe. But when the soldiers stepped out, they asked for tickets. Turns out the only one in the group who had a ticket was Jack's boss. Even his girlfriend wasn't on the list. As Jack's boss walked away with his 2 sons, the rest of the group fell into despair. When the boss arrived at the Ark base and saw the massive ships, he was stunned. Meanwhile, Jack and his group spotted a passing vehicle. They rushed forward, calling out to the driver. Turns out the passengers were heading to the base too. The grandson of an elderly woman in the car was one of the construction workers on the Ark. He knew about a secret passage leading inside, but with so many people, sneaking in would definitely raise suspicion, so the worker refused to let them in.
You don't have to take all of us. Please, just take my children. I'm begging you.
Why should I do that?
Same reason you said for your family. Please.
Jack's ex-wife pleaded. She just wanted her kids to get inside. They didn't even speak the same language, but the old woman softened. She told her grandson to take everyone inside. Just then, a malfunction occurred on the Ark. Thousands of people were left stranded. When they realized they had been abandoned, Jack's boss knocked out a security guard with a single punch and made a break for it in the chaos. But the captain suddenly ordered the doors to close. Thousands were locked out. Seeing this, the boss grabbed his 2 sons and jumped. By now, Jack and his group had snuck onto the Ark with the worker. Tom begged the vice president to let the people outside in. He couldn't just stand there and watch them die.
I read a quote 2 days ago. The author is probably dead by now, but he said the moment we stop fighting for each other, that's the moment that we lose our humanity.
And in order to save the human race, we have an obligation to stick to this plan, which every nation on this flotilla has signed off for.
They're in God's hands now. If we start our future with an act of cruelty, what will you tell your children?
In the end, all the world leaders agreed. If we have to sacrifice others to survive, then maybe humanity isn't worth saving.
Agree. Open the gates.
Just as the doors were about to open, Gordon and the worker fell into the gears. Their tools got jammed in the machinery. The worker was badly injured, but Gordon wasn't so lucky. He was completely crushed. Thousands of people rushed inside. After everyone made it on board, Jack's boss finally climbed up from below, but the doors were about to close. With his last ounce of strength, he threw his sons inside. Then he fell into the abyss. The floodwaters were closing in fast. Then, another problem. The captain realized the doors wouldn't shut. Without that, the Ark couldn't launch. They quickly searched for the issue. Something was jammed in the gears. Turns out it was one of the workers' tools. But there was no time. The Ark was already flooding. Water kept pouring in, pushing the Ark toward Mount Everest. If they crashed, everyone on board would die. Someone had to pull the tool out. Jack stepped up. After all, this was his mess. He never planned to make it out alive, but his son refused to stay behind and secretly followed him. Inside the gears, they found a cable, but no matter how hard they pulled, they couldn't get it loose. The Ark was now just 400 meters from crashing into Everest. Then, at the last second, they got it out. The doors slammed shut. Right as the Ark was about to collide, the captain reversed at full power. They just barely escaped disaster. When Jack surfaced, everyone cheered. For the next year, they lived on the Ark. Every now and then, the doors would open, letting people step onto the deck to breathe fresh air. Finally, the Earth's crust settled, and humanity was ready to start a new life.
Daddy, when will we go back home?
Well, we talked about that. We're gonna find a new home out here somewhere, right? I mean, wherever we're all together, that's home.